Jordan and Gretzky, Serena and Ruth. Remembering great ones is easy to do. But what about the no-names who spent their whole lives long snapping footballs and catching sack flies? They're guys, remember that guy. Remember that guy, remember that guy, remember that guy, remember that guy. They're just gonna remember some guys now.
And now Clark comes away with the steal. Clark thought about it from 3, will dip inside and lay it in. There are the first points for Remember That Guy, the show where we mine our memories for nuggets of nostalgia about peripheral players past and present. Hey there, folks. I'm one of your hosts, James, and I've got Fever.
Fever abounds, and they are so sick to watch. Diaz, back with you once again. We have a very special guest with us, the man on the call for that famous first bucket. Please introduce yourself.
It was a great time. I made sure to not call any of the turnovers, so no one noticed that they happened. But it's me, the very special guest, Xavier.
Oh, we all noticed, Xavier.
Did you see
the people on radio didn't notice because I didn't tell them.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair.
Did you see that list of the players to have the most turnovers in their debuts? It's like basically like an all-time great list of the WNBA. So It's like, you know what? Honestly, that's exactly what you needed to do, Caitlin.
It's people who would immediately be trusted with the ball who had to immediately then get used to not being the single greatest player by a wide margin on the court for the first time.
Right, and even then, we still finished with 20 points, 4 of 11.
Exactly!
I mean, we might be talking about this a little more and making memories, but I gotta say, there's something beautiful. Like, the scriptwriters did a great job that Indiana on back-to-back nights is going to be hosting New York in massive games in the trajectories of both franchises. It's incredible. It's incredible how it's worked out this way.
Well, let's not keep the people waiting any longer. What is it that's making memories for us this week?
So I forget the specific names. Xavier probably remembers them. But did you guys hear about this Dutch referee in like the 3rd tier? I think he's either 3rd or 4th tier. Essentially, this was the most rigged match of all time.
Soccer only or like sport agnostic, just the most rigged match?
There are like other sports, like, I don't know much about the history of netball. Maybe there's a crazy netball controversy that I'm unaware of. But for the sports that I know, this is the craziest, like most obvious rigging that I've ever seen. There was, the referee is like a 61-year-old guy. He's known to be a fan of the one club. And if they get a draw, they win the league, they win promotion. That team goes down 1-0 early on. He ensues to give 3 separate red cards to the other team, none of which were even close to being remotely justified. They're like maybe not even fouls.
So we're playing 11-on-8 soccer.
We're playing 11-on-8. And they're still just not getting the equalizer that they need to guarantee promotion. So he calls for 15 added minutes in the second half.
Shit. Fucking hell, dude.
There was maybe 5 minutes that should have been added, and those would have only been added because of the red cards that he gave. Like, it is a gross miscarriage of justice. It ends up in the 90 plus 15th minute. They get the equalizer that they need to clinch the title, to clinch the promotion. And the most incredible part is that when the team is on the stage lifting the trophy, the referee goes up there with them, grabs the trophy himself, starts dancing and singing with it. The Dutch FA then came out and said, like, dude, obviously you're banned. Like, what the hell? This is absurd. And like, there's ongoing protests of whether or not the game should be replayed or not. But when they asked the guy about it, he said, I'm 61. I'm a lifelong fan. What a better way to go out than to do this for my favorite team.
Would you guys do it? Would you throw it all away if you had the opportunity to ref or ump like a game 7 for one of your teams? It means like you can never even set foot in that. Like that's the last interaction you will ever have with that team. Would you do it? Does it cheapen it for them?
So I used to umpire Little League. I did that for like 5-6 years. I can say I understand how the thought like enters your head, because I remember I was doing it was like a 10-year-old baseball game, and going into the 5th inning, this kid had a perfect game, and there was a 3-2 pitch that like was off the plate, but not by a lot. So I called strike 3. Like, I get it. You get caught up in the moment. These things happen. But to add 15
fucking
minutes...
gotcha! Banned for life, Diaz. We have it on tape.
I'm just explaining the nuance. I don't think I could add 15 minutes and send off 3 players on the opposition for not even close to offenses. But then, like, again, the fact that he gets up on the stage, lifts the trophy along with the team, like, maintains they had no awareness that he was going to do this going in. And, like, I honestly believe them. I think this is just a rogue guy that said, fuck it, this is my team. This is how I can go out. You know, guns blazing, red cards blazing.
I would love Zach Galifianakis to do I was trying to think in my head, because this feels like a pretty entertaining movie. I feel like Zach Galifianakis is a good referee in that role.
They should make a movie about this. But yeah, I read about that. Obviously, I don't remember any of the names, but like you can look that up. You can look up Dutch League, 3rd tier referee. Like, it's going to come up. Unreal. The beautiful game, as they say.
The beautiful game. Perhaps they'll make a movie. It's definitely made memories. But Xavier, I have a feeling that is not what is making memories for you right now.
Yeah, but I bet you're not going to guess what is making memories for me. Because what's making memories for me is the new Canadian men's soccer coach.
Here's the thing, Xavier, if you'd asked me, do you know what I would have said? What? Some obscure soccer hire. So actually, I think enough. I can guess this.
So Canada just hired Jesse Marsh as their soccer coach heading into the Copa America. And I love Jesse Marsh as a Red Bulls fan. He was our greatest ever coach. But I don't want to talk about just him being hired. I want to talk about one of my favorite things. Sponsored job titles, as I have talked about on this podcast before. So the Canadian Soccer Federation is flat out broke. This is a well-known thing. There were a lot of issues with the Canadian women refusing to play because they weren't getting paid. It's a big problem. Jesse Marsh's official title is the MLS Canada men's national team head coach, because the 3 Canadian MLS teams donated money to afford his salary, and so he's essentially being paid by the 3 Canadian MLS teams to coach Canada, which has caused a big issue, because Canada also has their own soccer league, the Canadian Premier League. And all of the Canadian Premier League teams are saying, if this guy is being paid by MLS, our competitor, is he going to be incentivized to not bring any Canadian Premier League players to the Canadian roster? And it's just a very weird situation where you have 2 different top divisions in Canada, and one of them is paying for the head coach of the national team. So I'm very interested to see what's going to happen with that. And this is not a fix. Canada is still absolutely broke, and this is not going to improve things for the men's or women's national teams. I mean, you could say it's creative by the guy who took over Canadian soccer, who went out on Twitter and said that they were broke a couple months ago. But I find it very interesting to see that a national team head coach is being sponsored by a league that is technically the domestic league of their biggest rivals, the US, and not the league that Canada recognizes as a top division, the Canadian Premier League. So that's a very interesting situation to me. The other thing I just want to shout out is that Cameron Brink had the best rookie debut of any of the rookies in the WNBA. She was phenomenal. She got to work on the fouling. 5 fouls in 20 minutes is too much. But her shooting was great. Distribution was great. Defense was fantastic. She looked like one of the best players on the court, which is not a thing that you see really from WNBA rookies ever. So big shout out to Cameron Brink. I really enjoy her game, and I can't wait to see, even though I don't care for the Sparks at all, I'm very excited to see how she continues to develop.
It will be unfortunate that the Sparks' next game is against the Aces, and Cameron Brink's going to get fucking wrecked. but that's okay. I want to say one thing going
She does not look 6'5" when you see her just normally, and then you see her on the court next to everyone else. You're like, oh yeah, she is 6'5".
I want to say one thing about the W real quick as we head in, which is I got called out by a buddy of mine because I've told him many a time that I think dynasties are dumb and boring, largely. This is in reference to his team, the Kansas City Chiefs, which delightfully is now horrible for so many other reasons since I started vehemently hating them. But he was saying, hey, how can you say you're an S's fan? I want to acknowledge as we go into the season, it would be better for the league if a team like New York or a team like Connecticut or something like that won. Like, that would be altogether a much more interesting storyline, and as a neutral fan, I would welcome it. It just happens that my team is the Aces, and they are probably going to wreck shit again. And, I'm not going to get off the team because they're turning into this, and I want to just acknowledge it would be better if someone else won. It's too bad they probably won't. But let's just get into the swing of things. We are past the quarter mark in baseball, and we're entering the weird middle summer part that's my personal favorite part. It's the part where just every day you gotta kind of find something to talk about with like the people that you just have in your work, in your home life, like the people that you see regularly and talk to about baseball. And you're starting to run out of topics because you've been doing this for 2 months already. I was talking recently with someone about quantum superpositioning in baseball, by which I mean there's this thing that I love about it where when someone's theoretically on third, deep fly is hit, when that ball is caught, for a moment, the batter there has recorded an at-bat in which they recorded an out and their batting average drops. That is the truth for a short period of time. And then if that becomes a sacrifice fly because the person from third has gone on to score, now that no longer counts as an at-bat, counts as a plate appearance. The average stays the same as it was because that does not affect the batting average. But for a moment, that batting average was changed until something else happens. This was kind of like a Schrodinger's at-bat. And this came up because the Orioles were in an interesting position. They had, to that point, gone 104 regular season series without being swept. Every single series since Adley Rutschman came up. They lost game 1 of the home series to start this week to the Toronto Blue Jays. Game 2 is rained out and rescheduled for July 29th. And they'll play game 3, day game. I'm at work. I've got the radio up at the front desk of the museum. And it's getting late in the game. Still 2-1 Blue Jays. Now, here's an interesting thing. Technically, if they lost this game, it wouldn't necessarily mean that the streak is over. Because on July 29th, there would be a third game from this series. And so in theory, the Orioles could have continued to compile this streak, and they could be pretty close to the record of 125 sent by, I believe, the 1924 Cardinals. They're very, very close to that record. Within this year, they could hit that. And they could even have hit it by July 29th, I believe, at which point, if they won that game then, the streak had been going the whole time. If they lost it, they would have been doing that for nothing. It was just this very interesting conversation that was immediately rendered moot by an Adley Rutschman walk-off home run. And the Orioles are just great, man. But it is just the weird bullshit that you kind of got to come up with around the sport there in the middle of the season. That it's when I know that we're in the best part of the season. It was very confirming to have that moment with some of my coworkers. And go Birds. That's what's making memories for me right now.
See, my guys hit ball hard, and that's what I like about baseball.
To be fair, my guys do hit most home runs. So my guys also hit ball pretty darn hard.
Of course.
I do believe that the Orioles have 4 players with an OPS plus of 140, and the Phillies have 3 currently.
I have no interest in talking baseball at this point in the year, but I have to say, if the Yankees are known for anything, it's hitting ball hard.
Yeah, so we are currently talking about, I think, 3 of, at worst, the 5 best baseball teams.
Hey, right now, they have the 3 best records in the major leagues.
It's these 3 Dodgers and Atlanta.
We don't have to say who's number 1. No one needs to say who's number 1, 2, and 3, but we have the 3 best records in the major leagues.
What this reminds me of, so I learned an incredible tidbit about the infamous Thaddeus Young graphic that I'm sure most of our listeners have seen.
Yes.
Like, there's only 5 players in NBA history to have all of these stats.
The Corey Brewer inspiration.
Yes. That was the only night for which that statistic was true and valid. After that game, his averages dropped and they never once again got back to those. So that was literally the only night in NBA history that you could clump Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, LeBron James, Michael Jordan, and Thaddeus Young into that graphic.
And I bet Thad Young has never cared about that whatsoever, because Diaz, I know for a second, if you were a professional and had one game where you could have stats that were in that category and then you shit the bed the rest of your career and were out of the league within a year, you would keep that screenshot on you all the time and be like, yes, this is me. This is what I did.
Well, here's what I say. Yes, it is Thaddeus Young and it is what he did. But really what it is it's the graphics department for that broadcast and the research department for that broadcast pulling out this incredible nugget on the only night in history in which they could have pulled it. Like, if they looked it up the next night, it would have been like, oh, damn, yesterday we could have done this. There was only one shining moment in which that broadcast team could have put that together. And by God, they did it.
Tell us more about the real heroes, Diaz.
You know, there's people who do things, and then there's people who say that they did those things. And I think it's the people who say that do the most.
I mean, they maintain the oral tradition, much as we do here. They help us to remember, and remembering is what we're here for this week. So let's go ahead and get into the category that I've once again selected. Last week was really about celebrating moments of triumph. Brandi Chastain's moment of triumph, the many moments of triumph that Leifer was there to capture. And while it was not necessarily Lukumba Mute's moment of triumph, it was still adjacent to a moment of triumph. This particular week, I wanted to go far away from that. I wanted to move towards ignominy and guys associated with mistakes, errors, or blunders. And so I'm going to go to baseball because it, after all, has the statistic error. It felt most appropriate. And I want to get out of the way that I'm not doing Bill Buckner. But I do want to give Bill Buckner a shout out because he's kind of representative of what I hope we all three will try to do with this category, which is talk about these guys, with Bill Buckner, this talented 22-year vet who set many records in baseball that still stand for assists and fielding accomplishments by a first baseman, forever remembered for this error. I think that is, kind of the curse of the category that we're looking at today. Now, there are a lot of similarities between Buckner and my guy. They were also a first baseman. They were also involved in a long World Series drought. The event that would overshadow them, however, was very early in their career. It was much earlier in the history of baseball altogether. This was at a time when you wouldn't necessarily call this a blunder. You wouldn't necessarily call it a blooper. You might go so far as to call it a boner. And I want to talk about baseball's biggest boner ever, committed by the ivory pate, the leather skull, bonehead himself, Fred Merkle.
When I was in elementary school, we could always check out a book. We had a day to go check out a book. And I always would get, it was a collection of the 10 craziest game in baseball history. And it's 1930s and before. And the same way that you listen to your favorite song 500 times, I read the accounting of Bonehead Merkle's game at least 500 times in third grade. All I know is the bonehead, but I need to know more about the Fred.
It's a bonehead moment, but yes, there is a lot more to Fred. In fact, Fred is not his name. His name is Karl. He's Karl Friedrich Rudolf Merkle. And with that name, you could probably guess that his dad is a German immigrant. Dad Ernest and his wife Amelie, they give birth to Karl December 20th, 1888 in Watertown, Wisconsin. So we're going way back to start here. They don't stay in Wisconsin too long. They move to Toledo, Ohio. In fact, he is the only player recorded in Baseball Reference to have attended Toledo High School and later appeared in a major league. He's a bigger star, actually, at football for this time with the school. After high school, he decides he is going to try pro football first. In 1906, there is a Toledo sort of semi-pro organization. They are legit enough to play the Canton Bulldogs, which are a team that'll be very formative in football. Meanwhile, in baseball, he is a solid pitcher, and that year around graduation, he is getting scouted at the professional level by baseball, and eventually he realizes there's more of a path with this, there's more of a chance of making a living with this, and so he nearly gets signed by Washington, but instead, he just goes to some of the local minor league. He's in the Ohio-Pennsylvania League, which today would be considered middle class C, which doesn't exist anymore. He struggles there, and he is eventually cut and sent all the way down to the Southern Michigan League. It's just like the only place that he can find a job to catch on to. He had already, in the first couple years in the semi-pro league, focused more on hitting than the pitching that he'd done in high school. And finally here in the Southern Michigan League, of all places, his bat just takes off. He is initially also put at the hot corner, but later on he's moved to first. I actually want to take this one real quick. Is first the cold corner, or is it like the lukewarm corner? If third is the hot corner, what is first?
It's
where you put everyone who can't field, and you want them to have the least amount of impact
No, that's
in the
left
game.
field.
no, yeah. It's the left field of the infield.
I mean, yes, there we go. The lukewarm corner, the left field of the infield. He finishes out that year in 1907 with the team in Tecumseh, who put up an incredibly nice 69-42 record. Leads to him getting purchased by the New York Giants, the New York baseball Giants, and he debuts with them in September of 1907, plays 15 games down the stretch exclusively as a pinch hitter, all at the age of 18. He's the youngest player in the majors at this time. 1908, he is still the youngest player in the National League at the age of 19. And he's pinch hitting. He's backing up Fred Tenney, the first baseman for the Giants at the time. In July, he has a blood infection that almost leads to his foot getting amputated. They manage to surgically correct it. He's brought back onto the roster just in time for Fred Tenney on September 23rd to suffer a little bout of lumbago. He has some back pain. Wakes up that day, he's just not feeling good. And so Giants manager and duckpin bowling legend John McGraw pencils in Fred Merkle for his first ever start at first base and his first ever start in the lineup at all in a major league game. This game is against the team that at that time is the number one rival for the National League pennant this year, the 1908 Cubs, best known for a trio of infielders, shortstop Joe Tinker, second baseman Johnny Evers, and first baseman and manager Frank Chance. Tinker's to Evers to Chance is going to become famous because of a 1910 poem by Franklin Pierce Adams. He was a columnist in New York, and he was a Giants fan. Some foreshadowing, these guys torture the Giants, and the double play combination would be Tinker's Evers Chance. And so it's kind of treated as a refrain in this poem. And that's frankly inflated their reputation a little bit. They were fine. They weren't, based on available statistics, that much better than any other infield. But because of this poem, they're all in the Hall of Fame now. Whatever. They are still very good, though. I'm not trying to say that they're not worthy rivals of the Giants. And before we could talk about the September 23rd game, we're going to rewind just a tiny bit to a September 4th game for the Chicago Cubs. That day, they are being hosted by the Pirates. Pittsburgh is eventually going to be the third place team in this pennant race, so they figured into it largely. Warren Gill, who is yet another first baseman, plays just 27 games in his whole career, all in this season. He's on first base in the bottom of the 10th with the bases loaded, and the Pirates get the game-winning RBI single. But Johnny Evers is a real kind of Chris Paul type. He knows the rule book inside and out, and he will fucking stitch on you. He's a little rat. So he protests that Gill, after the hit, never touched second. This is per either, I believe, Rule 59 at the time. It's now listed as Rule 5.08 in parentheses A, which is just about when a theoretical game-winning single is hit, all players must advance safely. But this had kind of just been waved off by everybody all the time. Clearly, this was the game-winning single. The run had come in. The runner who hit it reached first. Everyone normally would just be fucking cool about it. But Johnny Evers, I got really into why Johnny Evers would have ever thought about this. Because possibly of this column that had been written into the Tribune earlier this year on July 19th. It was a Ask a Writer About Baseball column. This is while the Cubs were in Chicago. Some fan just asks what would happen in this situation. And the columnist responds, this rule, if it was legally applied, if they didn't touch second, they'd be out, game would end. Evers goes to umpire Hank O'Day. He protests this, and Hank O'Day does not grant him this satisfaction. After some back and forth, they continue to jaw back and forth at the hotel where O'Day and the team are staying. And eventually O'Day's okay, Evers, yes, you have a point. That game's done. Please stop dealing with this game that we finished hours ago. But you're right. If someone were to do that, that would not be the correct end of a game. And so this now sets the stage for this game just about 3 weeks later. It's a pitcher's duel all day. Jack Feister is on the mound for Chicago, and on the bump for New York is Christy Mathewson. He blinks first. Tinker scores a solo shot in the top of the fourth. It is a classic Polo Grounds in the Parker, just rolls all the way to the back of the field, and he's able to circle the bases before it gets tossed back in. That is the first home run that anyone had managed off Christy Mathewson in 2 months at that time, since Joe Tinker last hit one on July 12th. So Joe Tinker torches him those 2 times. Eventually, a sac fly in the bottom of the 5th for New York ties it up. It's 1-1 here in the bottom of the 9th. Giants get a ground out to lead it off. Art Devlin gets aboard with a single as the potential winning run with 1 out. Moose McCormick hits another grounder, but Devlin's hard slide at second breaks up the potential double play. There is no Tinkers to Evers to chance to end this game yet. So now Moose McCormick is on the first, and there's 1 on with 2 out for Fred Merkle stepping up to the plate. This is, remember, his first ever start as a 19-year-old, his 48th plate appearance this season. Shoots a single down the right field line to put runners on the quarters with 2 outs for Al Bridwell. And Feister, still in the game, facing his 35th batter of the day, tosses a first pitch fastball that Bridwell just absolutely smokes into center for a single, scoring McCormick and winning this crucial game in the pennant race. And here's a funny thing about the Polo Grounds at the time. One of the main exits was in center field. So fans had to go out of the stands into the field to exit through the back of center field in this cavernous place. With this, they're going to storm the field to celebrate any big win, obviously, because that's also their way to get out. So they rush the field. Everyone's congratulating Merkle, he was a huge part of this. Everyone's thrilled for this rookie. And he's starting to exit with the Giants to the dugout. Accounts at this point differ. We're going to try and give as balanced of a cumulative one as we can. A lot of people report that Evers immediately, when they start walking up to the dugout, starts hollering for the ball. What is not clear is where the ball is or who has it. A ball gets into him. It is completely possible that it's just a different one that someone found in the dugout. There are reports that it may have been thrown into the crowd, and then one of the outfielders went into the crowd to get it and toss it back. There is then a scuffle at second base between some of the Giants players and they're fighting amongst one another trying to get it. Based on this account, there was a Tribune writer who later tries to score this play. And he has a record of 18 assists based on accounts of how many people might have touched this ball. But eventually what happens is Merkle realizes what Evers is trying to do, because Evers' antics 3 weeks ago had been widely publicized. John McGraw should have let everyone know that this was a possibility. Merkle's running back to second. He claims he touched it first. Evers does eventually get a ball back at second. He tags, says that Merkle's out. They appeal to the base umpire, Bob Emsley. And Bob Emsley is I didn't see shit through the crowd. I can't possibly judge this. I need to turn this over to the home plate umpire, who is none other than Hank O'Day from that same game in Pittsburgh. Frank Chance comes out to argue. John McGraw is out to argue. The crowd realizes something's going up. The 2 umps have to go confer in the cage. By the time they reach a decision, the crowd is still stamping on the field. They've made resuming this game impossible. The Cubs have to be taken to the hotel by police, and the game is called a tie, which is announced via the New York stock ticker to the nearby city. Merkle acknowledges, look, I didn't touch second base initially. I was going to walk off everyone did. But he did rush and beat Evers the bag. Doesn't matter. The New York Times the next day runs the headline, "Blunder costs Giants victory." And there are similar headlines all across the country, particularly in New York and Chicago. And in the popular lexicon, this soon becomes Merkle's boner. National League President Harry Pulliam rules that they will recontest the match if it affects the final standings. And after 153 games, New York and Chicago have identical 98, 55, and 1 records. And play one final game. And in the third, Tinkers, Evers, and Chance, they're all involved in a 4-run rally. They don't score anymore, but they don't need to. It is a 4-2 win. One of the most controversial pennant wins in baseball history to send Chicago to the last World Series that they'll experience for 108 years. I put a pin in this for 1 second, but did Fred Merkle cause the Chicago Cubs curse? The thing about Fred Merkle in this game, for his part, doesn't see the field at all. He's just sitting on the bench next to John McGraw. He loved that spot next to John McGraw. This incident is framed as a naive rookie idiot versus this savvy veteran. McGraw is considered like one of the best baseball minds in the world this time, and he raved about Merkle's like mental makeup, his intelligence. All the other teammates like frequently called him the smartest player on the club. None of that mattered because PR matters, like we said last week, and the public just is eviscerating Merkle at all times. In 1909, as a 20-year-old, he's so tortured by this fan base, he can barely bat 191 in 79 games, and he's telling John McGraw, like, get rid of me, dude. These fans do not want me. McGraw says to him, I wish I had more players like you. Don't pay attention to those watercocks. Sorry, weathercocks. Weathercocks is the appropriate one.
Not as cool. Not as good.
Not quite as cool. I apologize for my bad handwriting again. But yeah, I mean, he fully has the support of the manager and his teammates. And starting in 1910, he does like really put it together, both as a hitter and as a prolific base stealer. He's not super fast, but he's a smart guy. Again, he gets good jumps. Particularly, he gets really good at stealing third base. He gets a little bit of vengeance against the Cubs in that year, by the way. On September 22nd, almost exactly 2 years to the day after his boner. It's the same place. It's between first and second base at the Polo Grounds. Evers is base running this time. Johnny Evers gets a walk. There's a pickoff attempt, and Merkle tosses back, so Evers steps off the bag again. At which point, Merkle reveals he has pulled off the hidden ball trick, and he tags Johnny Evers out. And unfortunately, it's like shouting into the void. No one cares because, like, this is this is not as thrilling of a season. It's not as important of a moment. It's just really hard for him to shake this. No one cares about a 110 OPS plus over 10 years in New York with 212 stolen bases in that time. They care instead about plays that he makes in like the 1912 World Series. We're right in the middle of a Giants National League pennant three-peat. Merkle finds himself in Game 8. This is the best of 9 years. And there's a muff by a fellow Fred, center fielder Fred Snodgrass. So Merkle's in foul territory to try and reel in this out with a guy on base. Mathewson, on the mound again, calls him off. Says, let the catcher get it. Catcher drops it. Sox end up later that inning scoring the winning run, go on to take the series. And the New York Times, despite all evidence that this is not our friend Fred's fault, runs the headline, Bonehead Merkle does it again. The Giants drop all three of those World Series. As that core ages, Merkle ends up getting sent across the East River. He's with the Brooklyn Robins for a little bit. He loses a fourth World Series with them in 1916. The next year of all teams he could possibly be traded to, he's sent to the Chicago Cubs. Funny how this happens. None of the three are still there, Tinkers, Evers, and Chance. And he gets to the 1918 World Series with the Chicago Cubs. But unfortunately, he had cursed them, and they do lose to the Boston Red Sox. This is then the last Boston Red Sox World Series for many years. Did Fred Merkle curse both the Chicago Cubs and the Boston Red Sox? Many people are saying.
Equal opportunity curses.
Exactly. I mean, he's responsible for a cumulative, 192 years of World Series drought then? It's pretty impressive. That is his fifth loss overall. He has like 2 more years at Chicago, spends 4 years with Rochester in the International League, which nowadays is a AAA league. Rochester at one point was the affiliate for the Orioles. And in 24, there are negotiations to send him to his third New York team, the Yankees. Rochester offers him as a backup to their star first baseman, Wally Pipp. They want, in return, a youngster named Lewis Gehrig. The Yankees counter with cash. This ends up being a good move. Lou Gehrig largely takes over from Wally Pipp. Merkle only plays 8 games in 2 seasons with them, exclusively backing up Lou Gehrig. But again, he's this very valued clubhouse presence. Goes on to like be a coach with them for a little bit. And for what it's worth, because he does play just 1 game there with the Yankees in that last season, he does lose a 6th World Series with the Yankees. Altogether, he plays for 16 years, 1,638 games altogether, and a totally solid 273, 331, 383 slash. It's a 109 OPS plus, 272 stolen bases. Fred Merkle was a good player. He was never an all-star, but he was like a guy's guy. But the love from like fellow players, I feel like we see this in a lot of different leagues. Being the guy that all the players love doesn't necessarily mean that the fans love you. And because of managing and coaching, like his poor treatment by fans, ends up just kind of scaring him away from the game. The last straw is when he's doing some coaching early on, thinking he might pursue that, and a minor league player that he's working with calls him a bonehead. It's like, nope, done with this. So he retreats away. Sadly, on March 2nd, 1956, Fred Merkle is out shopping, Reportedly, he becomes ill, asked for his pills, laid down, and died on the spot at the age of 67. This is, thankfully, though, 6 years after I think something very important happened. He made his first and only major post-playing appearance in a baseball setting at a Giants old-timers game. And thankfully, with nearly 5 decades removal at that point, they were able to recognize him for what he did, give him a standing ovation. But this revisionist look at him that I'm trying to present is largely posthumous. It's a little bit too little too late for him. Honors have slowly come in. He does have a marble monument erected to him in his hometown of Watertown, Wisconsin, which notes, importantly, his intelligence on the field, which is, to people who don't know the story, maybe a strange description of a bonehead. But I think it is a very appropriate description of a guy. And so that is Fred Merkle, my guy this week.
All I can think is Jim Kelly, eat your heart out.
Now, it's not consecutive, but yeah, man. I mean,
that's got to be the record, right? For an anti-Robert Horry, to
we're going to the tape, folks.
To lose 6 without having won any.
What was Jerry West at?
Period.
But again, there's things like Jerry West had the streak until all of a sudden quantum superpositioning, he's won one, and now it doesn't matter anymore.
How many did he lose, though?
I think he lost 7.
The players who have lost the most NBA finals, I mean, it's him number 1, and then Elgin Baylor number 2. And then number 3 is
8.
LeBron James.
He lost 8.
Yeah, Elgin Baylor is 0 for 7. So there you go. Elgin Baylor, my bad. Elgin Baylor is 0 for 7.
Elgin Baylor is the only person who can claim to have had a tougher go of it.
And Elgin Baylor doesn't have a famous heir that wasn't even really his fault named after him.
Right, that's fair. I think that the fact that he has the nickname is probably worth 2 more championship losses.
I just kept getting mad for him. I kept getting mad for him going through this, that he's the one taking all of this blame as a fucking... But I mean, that is what happens when you are involved with a famous mistake, a famous error, a famous blunder. And I would love to hear from you, Xavier, a guy that is responsible for one of those such things.
Yeah, so I'll be honest. I'm shocked we haven't talked about this person. I looked at our RTG tracker and our Guy of the Day tracker multiple times because I could have sworn we would have talked about them at some point. But I double and triple checked. I did not see their name on it. So as far as I know, it's good to talk about. So today I want to talk about one of the most infamous blunders in Winter Olympics history and the person responsible for it, Lindsey Jacobellis.
Yeah, I guess we haven't talked about Lindsey Jacobellis.
That was the exact reaction I had. I was like, how have we not talked about Lindsey Jacobellis? And I'm here to rectify that.
Well, we've done Winter Olympics, and I will stand by the 3 Winter Olympians we chose. We had 3 very good Winter Olympians.
Our Winter Olympics guys have all been very good. Even the ones that haven't gotten in. I've enjoyed all of them. But that's what I want to talk about today. Lindsey Jacobellis. She was born August 19th, 1985 in Danbury, Connecticut. She grew up loving skiing, but her family home burned down when she was 8, and her family couldn't afford to replace all of her skiing equipment. So what did they do? They bought snowboards because they were a lot cheaper. And so she started snowboarding. And she was really, really good at it. She was so good that she was able to go to the Stratton Mountain School in Vermont, which is a college prep school that focuses on training winter sports athletes for the Olympics.
I thought you were going to say training snowboarders, and training Winter Olympians is still very, very cool. But if you're going to tell me there was a private school that literally just trained snowboarders, I was...
Well, it's alpine and Nordic skiing and snowboarding. So it's pretty much just for skiing and snowboarding. It's up in the mountains in Vermont. They have their own mountain right next to the school with a bunch of different courses. And she excels, particularly in snowboard cross, which for those who don't know is just essentially a downhill race. Usually it's 1,000 yards. It's a narrow course with jumps. She was also pretty good at slope style to a lesser extent, which is a little different in that it's also downhill course, but you're also doing tricks to get style points on it. So it's small jumps and rails and things like that. And so if you are a young snowboarder in the early 2000s, what do? You go to the X Games.
Hell yeah.
And so a young 17-year-old Lindsey competes at the 2003 Winter X Games in Aspen. She gets a bronze in slopestyle, and she gets a gold in snowboard cross. Over the next couple of years, she decides to really just focus on snowboard cross, and she absolutely excels at it. She wins the X Games gold in 2004, X Games gold 2005, and at the 2005 World Championships in Whistler up in British Columbia, she wins the gold there too. So she enters the 2006 Winter Olympics in Turin as the heavy favorite because snowboard cross is making its debut. This is the first time it's ever been there, and she's the best in the world. So 20-year-old Lindsey expected to win pretty easily. Cruises through qualification, through the preliminary rounds, which is like a time trial. She finishes third. She finishes second in her quarterfinal before winning her semifinal heat and making it to the final medal run of 4 competitors.
Quick interjection. Do you remember the weird Ice Cube man Gliz? That was the mascot for the 2006 Torino Games. It's one of the ones that has haunted me a little bit more than the Olympic mascots are a little bit haunting. It's just
oh my god!
Are. But Gliz,
there's 2 of them.
Yeah, there's Neve and Gliz. Neve is Gliz's girlfriend. They look like they could kill me.
Oh my god! There's also one that's a snowflake called Aster.
There is Aster. Yes, there is Aster, who does look like an asterisk, and he is the Paralympic mascot. These mascots have remained in my mind for quite some time.
Oh my god, that's terrifying.
The 3D, fuzzy one that they have where his head is a literal cube, I don't like it, and folks, honestly, don't look this up.
That's wild. And they're made by a guy named Pedro Albuquerque.
Huh. Didn't know that.
Yeah, interesting. But back to Lindsey. As everyone had expected, she dominates the final. She's so far ahead in a sport that is usually decided by tenths of a second, hundredths of a second sometimes, that no one is even in frame with her. She is up by 3 full seconds, about 150 feet on the person in second place. Coming into the second to last jump, she decides she wants to have some fun, and she goes for a method grab of the board. And this is where Lindsey Jacobellis hot dogs it. She loses her balance, and she falls. As she's scrambling to her feet, Switzerland's Tanja Frieden passes her and wins the gold, with Lindsey recovering just in time to maintain the silver. Originally, she said she only did the grab to create stability, but eventually she admitted, quote, "I was caught up in the moment. I was having fun. Snowboarding is fun. I was ahead. I wanted to share my enthusiasm with the crowd. I messed up. Oh, well, it happens." This fall made headlines for a while. There was a good amount of arrogant American takes. ESPN compared it to Leon Lett and Bill Buckner, among many others. And, it hounded her for a while. But she's only 20 years old. She's the best in the world. Everyone knows it. So the odds were pretty good that she would get her Olympic gold and people can forget all about it. Less than a year later, at the 2007 World Championships in Switzerland, she retains her snowboard cross gold. But then 2 weeks later at the X Games, she falls again on the last jump and cartwheels across the finish line, essentially, getting passed by Joni Anderson as she did it. And now everyone's like, okay, she didn't learn from her lesson because twice in the space of a year, she's tried to get a little fancy with a jump at the end when she was about to win a gold medal. Obviously, X Games not on the same level as the Olympics, but she still kind of did it again. And there was more questions about, all right, well, is she ever going to learn? Is this just who she is? She comes back, wins the snowboard cross gold at the X Games again in 2008, 2009, and 2010. The latter coming just 2 weeks before the 2010 Olympics in Vancouver, where she's already won a snowboard cross gold at the World Championships 5 years prior, and she's again the heavy favorite. She finishes second in the preliminary qualification. She wins her quarterfinal. We're going back to James's favorite New York Times. This is directly from them. For 4 years, Jacobellis, an American snowboarder, has been haunted and hounded by a squandered golden opportunity. She had blown a huge lead in the field of the inaugural snowboard cross race grabbing her board in a stylish twist as she soared over the second-to-last jump. Jacobellis has dominated the sport. She has won 20 of 47 World Cup starts. She has won 2 World Championships, 2 season-long championships, and 6 gold medals at the Winter X Games. But there would be no redemption for Lindsey this time. She's in second place in her semifinal. She comes over a jump, and she has to adjust midair to avoid landing on Canadian Maëlle Ricker, who she was literally about to crush with her board. She overcorrects, clips a gate, and slides out of bounds for an automatic disqualification.
So, like, the first one was a conscious decision. Has that led to any kind of, like, yips-like thing with her? Or are these, like, largely freak occurrences and not affecting her play except in these Olympic moments?
So, there are a lot of questions about that with her specifically. She eventually at one point hires a mental skills coach named Denise Scholl to like help her because of possible just Olympic yips stemming from these issues. A lot of times she's tried to play down the Olympics in comparison to her career, but it is definitely something that seems like Olympic yips related. I'm going to get into that a little further as we go along. Afterwards, she said, "It's definitely not the end of the world for me. I have so many competitions a year. It's unfortunate that the rest of the world only sees this race and the one 4 years ago, so I guess I don't have a great track record." Which is, a struggle when you compete in a sport like this. I mean, look at Michaela Schifrin, who absolutely dominates the skiing world and then is more known for Olympic failure despite being the best 99% of the time. And that's what happens. But Lindsey comes back in 2011, wins her 4th straight X Games gold, takes back the World Championship gold that she had missed in 2009, but then she tears her ACL, and this takes her out of competition for a while. She misses pretty much all of 2012 and all of 2013, but thankfully she's able to recover just in time for the 2014 Olympics in Sochi, and she wins the 2014 X Games gold as a warm-up 1 week before the Sochi Games start. Just like in 2010, she finishes second in the preliminary qualifying and then wins her quarterfinal, which for this year has been expanded to 6 competitors per heat instead of 4, which they did because there were a lot more competitors in snowboard cross at this point. But it's also more dangerous because these courses are narrow. People fall all the time with 4 people going down. Now with 6, it's even more difficult. Going back to the New York Times, quote, "Again, there was nothing in front of Lindsey Jacobellis but open snow, a finish line and a mountain of possibility. She was in the lead, a pack of women chasing with little hope of catching the most accomplished female snowboard cross rider in history." Unfortunately, this is the lead-in to a story of how Lindsey Jacobellis crashes in the semifinals again.
New York Times really seems to like kicking people when they're down.
Especially Lindsey Jacobellis. They have this for every single Olympics that she's in. But yeah, exact carbon copy of 2010. She's disqualified in the semis. She said afterwards, "I don't think it has to do with the Olympics. It's just a fluke of when things work out for me and when they don't." Her American teammate, Faye Giuliani, said, "People don't understand how much pressure it puts on her. It breaks my heart because I think it takes the fun out of it for her. Just this event. She loves the sport. She's a phenomenal snowboarder, but it's in her head. With that much pressure on you, I've never had that kind of pressure on me, but I know that it just breaks her as an athlete. Maybe it was just a fluke mistake, but it's a bummer. She deserves more." It really is wild how her performance 99% of the time differs from the Olympics. After 2014, she wins the X Games gold another 2 times in a row. She wins the World Championship gold another 2 times in a row in 2015 in Austria and 2017 in Spain. So heading into the 2018 Winter Olympics in South Korea, the now 32-year-old Jacobellis has won 5 of the last 6 World Championship golds over 12 years and 10 X Games golds. But she still only has that 1 Olympic silver from Turin. And now she's one of the oldest competitors in the field, too, because most of the top contenders are 5 to 10 years younger than her. Snowboarding is a pretty young person's sport. And as a 31-year-old, I do not want to say 32 was old, but in snowboarding, it is very old.
I can only imagine how much damage it does to your ligaments and joints, having that huge impact on landing so many times.
My brother is a snowboarder recreationally. He fell one time badly and bruised his tailbone so horribly he could barely walk for weeks. And if you're doing this all of the time, I can only imagine the types of I'm surprised one ACL tear is the worst that I found for Lindsey Jacobellis' injury history, because I'm sure there's a lot more that weren't reported. In the 2018 Olympics, she finishes 4th in her preliminary qualifying. She wins her quarterfinal. Finally, she has a clear run in the semis and finishes 2nd in her heat behind Eva Semkova of Czechia, which is enough to make her first Olympic final in 12 years. She starts off strong. She's leading for the first half of the final before she starts fading a bit behind leader Michela Mioli of Italy. Going into the last jump, Mioli is in first with a pack of 4, including Jacobellis, right behind her. On this jump, on the landing, multiple racers lost balance or fall, including Chloé Trespouche of France, who falls and slides on her back, which forces Lindsey Jacobellis to slide wide to avoid her. And this is significant because Jacobellis finishes 4th, missing the podium by 0.03 of a second to Samkova, who was lucky enough that she was on the other side and did not have to deviate her path when Trespouche fell. This really felt like that was it. That was the end. That was her best chance. The X Games had dropped snowboard cross from its program in 2017, and it has never returned. They just decided it's not interesting enough to be like an X Games.
X Games, that's not interesting enough.
Yeah, they got rid of it. Just a straight race is not interesting to the X Games. So snowboard cross is no longer an X Games sport and has not been since. So at this point, this is now her 4th failed Olympics. The one thing that she won all the time no longer exists. So it's really only the World Championships that she has left at that point. And she's going into her mid-30s in a sport dominated by teens and people in their early 20s. In 2019, she finishes off the podium at the World Championships for the first time in a decade. She tries again in 2021, doesn't even make it out of the quarterfinals. And it feels like it's pretty much it. But Diaz, what is the hallmark of any good guy?
They lift other guys up.
What's the other one?
They have a funny nickname.
James, do you know what I'm talking about?
They have some bathroom-related issues that they need to keep displaying, is my understanding.
Yes, they still have some shit to prove.
Yeah.
It's a good way to say it. I did enjoy the way you said it, but
it's like you remember that meme where it's like the 17th century guy who's like making like a kind of gangster pose, and it's like
prim and proper.
Females acquire currency.
Despite being pretty far from her peak, the 36-year-old Lindsey Jacobellis does qualify for the 2022 Beijing Olympics, her 5th Winter Olympics. Not much of expected of her at this point. She qualifies pretty much just because the USA gets 4 spots. And in preliminary qualification, she finishes 5th. At this point, snowboard cross had moved back to 4-person heats, but because they still had so many more competitors, they added an additional qualification heat. So it goes from preliminary to first heat elimination and then quarterfinals instead of just straight to quarterfinals and then semis. So she wins her first qualification heat to make the quarterfinals. Then she wins her quarterfinal heat to make the semis. And then she wins the semis to make it back to the finals.
Legitimately don't remember what happens, and I'm on pins and needles right now.
And this time, James, nothing is going to stand in Lindsey Jacobellis' way. She starts off her run strongly, and she never lets anyone catch up. She holds on to beat Chloé Trespouche by 0.21 of a second.
I'm so glad it was specifically Trespouche.
And she wins her first Olympic gold medal 16 years after her original fall.
At what, 36 at this point?
36 years old. The 3 other competitors in the final were 27, 24, and 29. She is the oldest American woman.
The past is now, young women.
She was the oldest American woman to win a Winter Olympics gold medal. which is still the case. The 16 years between this gold and her 2006 silver is also the longest gap between medals for any woman, U.S. woman at the Winter Olympics. Afterwards, she said, "This feels incredible. The level that all the women are riding at is a lot higher than it was 16 years ago." So I felt like I was a winner just that I'd made it into the finals, because that's been a challenge every time. And she's right, because her first Olympics was the first time snowboard cross was there. And the level of talent across the world had increased significantly in the intervening 16 years. Like Italy and Europe, a lot of like European countries had become powers in a way that they were not at those first Olympic Games. This time we get a good New York Times headline. "Long known for a blunder, Jacobellis rewrites her story in gold."
Here's why that's bad for Joe Biden.
The Dow has crossed 40,000. Here's why that's bad for Joe Biden, and the world is going to explode. But back to Lindsey Jacobellis. Not only did this end her gold medal wait, it also ended the U.S.'s gold medal wait. Because the U.S. had not won a gold medal through the first 5 days of the Winter Olympics, which was their worst ever start to a Winter Olympics. On average, they had won at least one gold medal every 1.75 days beforehand. So they were on day 6 with no golds, and they did not expect Lindsey Jacobellis to win one. So the U.S. Olympic Committee was panicking a bit, and then 36-year-old Lindsey Jacobellis put the USA on her back. But Lindsey Jacobellis was not done yet. She still had more shit to prove. Because just a few days later was the first ever Olympics mixed team snowboard cross competition, where it's one run from the men's side and one run from the women's side.
Okay, so just like combo.
Yes.
Cool.
And Jacobellis and her partner Nick Baumgartner win their quarterfinal heat and then win their semifinal heat, which gets them to the 4-team final with 2 Italian teams and 1 Canadian team. The men's final goes first, and then in the women's run, pretty bad conditions. It's snowing, visibility is not very good. Marietta Odine and Caterina Carpano of Italy fall on a jump halfway through, leaving a straight shootout between Jacobellis and Michaela Maioli. Maioli has the lead almost the entire way. But Jacobellis reels her in, passes her right at the end, and wins the inaugural gold medal. After 16 years.
And then she doesn't drop a single race this entire Olympics.
Won every single heat in 2 different competitions.
Damn,
After 16 years of no golds, she now earns 2 in just 3 days. It's great. It's one of the best redemption stories, that I've really ever seen, because for so long she was known for the fall and then known for essentially having the yips in the Olympics stemming from the fall and just never getting back to that level.
And then she embraced the teachings of Stephen Bradbury. I was like, you know what? What if I just stayed on my feet?
And honestly, in a sport like snowboard cross, that's probably the best thing that you could do. Since then, she competed in the World Championships again in 2023 in Georgia, the country, not the state. She got the bronze in snowboard cross, but at this point, she's 38, and she's not really... She had her last hurrah, putting the U.S. on her back, but she's pretty much done with competing internationally. But still, it's such a phenomenal story, phenomenal tale of a massive blunder and redemption so far down the road that I really wanted to talk about it. And I'm excited to hear what Diaz has to say, because we've had 2 really good guys so far.
Well, first off, I just got to say, because when you said Georgia, the country, not the state, a question has wormed itself into my brain. Is there anywhere that you can snowboard in the state of Georgia?
There's got to be a mountain where they shoot snow on it.
There might not be. It's the Appalachians a little west of that. I don't think that quite goes
3
through.
ski resorts within driving distance of Atlanta, Georgia. Let's see if any are actually in Georgia. Ober-Gatlinburg is in Tennessee. Wolford
It's North
Ski
Carolina
Resort
and Tennessee.
They're all North Carolina and Tennessee. You might be right, Diaz.
Look at this. Incredible.
There are ski resorts in Blue Ridge, Georgia.
At least Blue Ridge is like an appropriate name for a place where this would be. That I'll accept. What I won't accept is to not have the opportunity to present my guy, in spite of how good the two so far have been. When you think of big blunders, you think of people who come up short on the biggest stage of all. For the guy that I want to talk about, that's exactly what he ended up doing. He had a long career in the NFL. It wasn't until 1978, in his final season, he got to play in Super Bowl 13. And on third down and goal, the Dallas Cowboys called a play that they had never run in this situation. Called for potentially, it was a play action. There were three other options, and the fourth option, the tight end, was the safety valve. Roger Staubach goes through his reads. He finds the safety valve come open, and Jackie Smith can't catch the ball, and Vern Lundqvist calls him the sickest man in America, and he's the guy that we're going to talk about right now.
Does he also have fever?
Fever, I'm not sure. He is not from Indiana, so that's a point not in favor of that. He is from Louisiana. He's a good old Bayou boy. Jackie LaRue Smith, born February 23rd, 1940. During most of his upbringing, he's not really a football player. What he's actually known for most is he's a track star. Runs the mile relay and the quarter mile for his high school, as well as the hurdles. His senior year, he wins the state championship for running those hurdles. He does play on the football team, but he just keeps getting injured on the football field. One year, it's an Achilles tear. The next year, it's osteomyelitis in his ankle. I've never even heard of it. Probably a track injury. But draws a lot of attention as a track athlete. And because of that, Northwestern State, which is based in Louisiana, they can offer him a partial track scholarship. But they can't give him quite a full ride. And his grades aren't quite good enough to get any academic scholarships. So what he settles on with the university is they say, look, if you also play for the football team, just don't quit. Like, just be a body on the football team and do what coach tells you to do. As long as you do that, you get a full scholarship. So he enrolls at Northwestern State. And again, primarily his focus is on track. He's mostly just there to be a body on the football team. But very soon when he gets there, he's 6'4" as this track star. And to be that fast at that size, a coach is going to find a way to take advantage of it. And the other thing is he's also not necessarily slim like you would think, because with the mile race, not necessarily a super long distance. It's still more about those quick twitch muscles and developing those. So he's like 6'4", 220. They have some raw clay here that they can try to mold into something. They're a run-heavy offense. So instead of putting him at receiver, where he's never going to get a chance to catch a ball, they put him at tight end. And quickly, he proves himself to be one of the best blockers on the entire team. They don't really throw it a ton, so he's like 4th, 5th most years on the receiving yards list for the team. But drawing enough attention, at least because of his athleticism at this size, and putting it together more as a receiver. He graduates after his senior year, and he has no plans at all to go into the NFL. But there was a scout from the St. Louis Cardinals who just happened to catch one of his games, made notes, said, hey, that big kid, he's pretty fast. There might be something there. And when it gets to the 10th round of the NFL draft, the Cardinals are kind of just grasping at straws in their draft room. And an anonymous member of that draft board pipes up and says, quote, what if we draft that redneck track star from Louisiana?
Hell yeah, Forrest Gump, basically. Well, no, he's Alabama, my apologies. But still the same Gulf area.
Gulf area, good old Southern boy. He's got an opportunity. Runs a lot. And they decide, why not? We're going to draft him. Take him in the 10th round. Their original plan for him is to take him to the outside, make him a traditional flanker, wide receiver, take advantage of his talents out there. But very quickly, he's showing that he's too valuable as a blocker to not have in on the line. But this is also the time when the tight end is not really utilized at all in the passing game. It is essentially a glorified 6th or 7th lineman, depending on the formation, and they're largely ignored as a receiving threat. Jackie Smith, despite being drafted in the 10th round, immediately seizes the starting tight end spot, and he kind of revolutionizes the tight end position as a whole. People don't really throw to tight ends at this time, again, as I said, but he, in one season, goes over 1,000 yards. He became the first tight end in NFL history to do that. In that season, the average starting tight end in the NFL went for 200 receiving yards. So he is, by a factor of 5, dominating the production from this position.
Like Kelsey, Andrews, Kittle, those dudes can get 200 in a game if they really go off.
Right, and this used to be what you would expect for an entire season for a tight end. So, very similar to Jack Manders revolutionizing the kicker position. Jackie Smith comes in and is revolutionizing and doing things at the tight end position that nobody ever imagined was possible. His 5th game of his rookie season, as you mentioned, a great tight end can go for 200 yards in any game. In week 5 of his rookie year, he goes against the Pittsburgh Steelers, going to go for 9 catches, 212 yards, and 2 touchdowns to lead the Cardinals to a 24-23 victory over those Steelers. And very quickly, he becomes a co-captain of the team as well. He's very well respected in the locker room, despite being a younger guy, and quickly becomes the face of the franchise, really, for the early on. I guess not early on. The middle-age St. Louis Cardinals.
Because, they're the oldest NFL franchise, which is always bizarre to remember.
Right, exactly. But, I feel like they went to Phoenix probably, I feel like it was probably, the early 80s.
That sounds about right.
So, yeah, the middle-aged St. Louis Cardinals.
Much as we do with many things here, we will assume that date is more or less correct.
It's more or less correct, and the thing that's definitely correct is, while he's also starting off revolutionizing the tight end position, he's also the team's punter for the first 3 years that he's in the NFL. So, a man of many talents. We love our special teams. We love Jackie Smith doing everything he can to help out for the team. His best season comes in 1967. Across 14 games, he goes for 56 yards, 1,295 yards, for a 21.5 yards per average reception, and 9 touchdowns along that way. The other thing to note about his career, as opposed to when he was in high school, and he wasn't really able to develop much as a football player because of those injuries, the torn Achilles, the ankle problems, he is incredibly durable in his NFL career. From his rookie year, he starts 121 consecutive games. It's not until his 1971 season, after being drafted in 64, that he ends up missing a game for injury. Incredibly consistent, very durable, very reliable. The problem is the Cardinals, while he's putting up these great numbers at tight end, are just not a good team for really his entire career. When he finally is getting towards the end of it, they win consecutive NFC East championships in 74 and 75, but by this point, his body is starting to fail him a little bit. He only played in 9 games in that 75 season. He has a couple injuries that just don't sound pleasant at all. First of all, there's a problem with the arch in the 1 foot. Most of us can relate to something like that. What we probably can't relate to is that he also developed a spinal condition where anytime he took a hit, his arms just went numb. Didn't know what was going on with them. Didn't feel them anymore.
Is that better or worse than your arms hurting every time you take a hit?
That's a very fair point. It's very fair. It could be a superpower by some definitions. Might help with the blocking, which by this point in his career, he is kind of widening down with his receiving prowess, but still a very effective blocker at his size. In 76, he is officially relegated to a backup role. He also plays in 77, but he really feels like it's about time to go. So he officially retires after that 1977 season for the Cardinals. When it comes back to August 1978, training camp time, the Cardinals are having a couple injuries at the tight end position. They might need a body to come in, so they had him come in for a physical, and they tell him that he failed the physical. It would later come out the owner lied about the failed physical. He passed the physical. It was fine. He just didn't want to bring him back. Didn't want to pay for the salary. Instead, figure it out. An incredible cheapskate move to a legend of your franchise. Very disrespectful by the Cardinals franchise. And when he doesn't get that call back, he kind of just assumes, like, okay, maybe it was going to happen. It didn't. I'm at peace with retiring. And then he gets a phone call from somebody that says that they're Tom Landry. And he thinks it's a prank call, so he hangs up at first. And then he calls back again and says, no, like, this is Tom Landry. We've been having a few injuries ourselves. Why don't you come on down for a tryout if we like what we see? How would you like to be a Dallas Cowboy? He turned and looked to his wife, Jerry. They talked, and she basically was like, go. This is the last chance. We got to take advantage of it. Go. So they pack their bags. They fly down. And the tryout goes well. He's not going to be a starter, but Tom Landry brings in Jackie Smith to be a backup tight end, a respected member in the locker room for this Dallas Cowboys team that's going for a repeat. He's that second tight end. He's a very good blocker in obvious run plays, but he doesn't get a single reception for the entire regular season that year. The Cowboys go 12-4. They win the East, and they go into the playoffs. In the divisional round, they are playing the Falcons, and they're down by a touchdown late in the third quarter. Staubach is out because of a concussion, so it's actually Danny White that's come in. And when things are looking like they might be about to fall apart for the Dallas Cowboys, Jackie Smith steps up with his first 3 catches of the entire season, including the game-tying touchdown late in the third quarter, as the Cowboys go on to win that game. They would go to the conference championship, they would win that, and they get into the Super Bowl to go against the Pittsburgh Steelers. It's 20-13 late in the third quarter. The Cowboys have the ball on about the 8 or 9 yard line, and this is obviously a critical juncture of the game. If you have to settle for 3, it's not the end of the world, but you would really like to get a touchdown here, draw back even. The call comes in from Tom Landry to Roger Staubach, and he's calling for this play action to the running back, and the tight end, the primary tight end, is supposed to go on a corner route to the end zone. If he's not there, Tony Dorsett is leaking out into the flat. If he's not there, you have the backside receiver. And finally, if all else is exhausted, Jackie Smith just run to the back of the end zone and stand there. Maybe you'll get open. The thing is, the Cowboys had never run this play in a game. And every time that they ran it in practice, it was specifically a goal line play. Like 1 yard line, maybe the 2 yard line, certainly not the 9 yard line. So when the play call comes in, Staubach actually calls timeout first and says, like, hey, Tom, I must have heard you wrong. I thought you called for this. And he's like, no, yeah, that's what I'm calling for. Rodgers at a loss. The play is obviously designed to work in a 1 or 2 yard situation, but fuck it, we're going to run it. We're going to see what happens. They get the play action, and almost immediately Jack Lambert comes up the A-gap, but they pick up the blitz. Roger Staubach is thrown off a little bit by this. He might have a little more time than he thinks he does, but while the rest of the routes are still trying to develop, Jackie Smith's explicit instructions were run to the back of the end zone, stand there, we'll see if you get open. The timing of the play is all thrown off. He is open, but the timing is so thrown off by the fact that they're running this goal line play from further back. Obviously, running to the back of the end zone takes longer, so as Jackie Smith is getting to the back of the end zone, he turns around. He sees the ball's already in the air on the way to him. It's not a great pass, but what they always say, if it hits you in the hands, you should catch it. It's a little low and behind him. He goes to press off to realign himself. His foot slips. He's still able to get his hands on it. He does drop the pass. Vern Lundquist immediately says,
bless his heart, he's got to be the sickest man in America.
And it's a sick irony at this point because the main story that was written in the local Dallas papers before this was, no matter how this game goes, Jackie Smith is going to be happy no matter what. He's going to be walking out with a smile. And now he has this horrific drop. The famous image that you remember of it is him flat on his back, hands on his head in the back of the end zone. And he just lays there for about 5 seconds before he finally kicks himself back up, goes back to the sideline. Cowboys kick the field goal, and they go on to lose the game by 4. It's one of those where your memory of it, and for us, it's not memory, it's just entirely perception. But when you see that highlight and you hear that call, you think, oh, this must have been like end of the game. They're down 4.
But you think that's the expiring play.
Right. And if not the expiring play, like in the last minute or so.
It was their last stab. They weren't getting the ball back.
Exactly. That's the thought in your head. And yet there's an entire 18 minutes of football that are still played after this. And like I relate it to the Steve Bartman incident. To a casual, or I won't even say a casual, to a Gen Z baseball fan who was born in 2005. Their impression of the Steve Bartman incident, right? No, isn't that crazy? That's like really upsetting to be a sentence that I can say out loud. But think of that person, and if all they've seen of the Steve Bartman clips is that, they're probably thinking, oh my God, this was game 7 of the NLCS, and if he makes that catch, that's the final out, and wow, like I can't believe it happened that way. But it didn't happen that way. And I think the way that we react to those moments when they happen is part of what affects that perception. Lynn Swann doesn't do a lot to help the perception because they asked him about it afterwards, and he said, oof, tough one. He doesn't have the heart of a hero. And this becomes...
Fuck the Cowboys, but also fuck the Steelers.
I mean, specifically Lynn Swann, I think it's very fair to say. Did run for governor in PA as a Republican.
Okay, yeah. I don't have anything against him other than being a Steeler, but that's enough for me to hate him.
But yeah, so they play on the rest of the game. They lose the Super Bowl. The Cowboys actually want him to come back even again for the next year. And like maybe part of that is feeling bad for him in that moment because, again, he in 1 year in this Cowboys locker room, everybody that was one of his teammates to a T says like it was Staubach and then it was Jackie in terms of who he respected in that locker room. They want to bring him back. He ultimately declines it. And Tom Landry writes him a beautiful letter while he is very much still going through a lot, like as the fallout from dropping that pass. Like he gets threatening phone calls from people. There's one crazy bettor that put $20,000 on the game and called him with death threats. Anytime somebody passes him on the street, it's like, oh, you're the guy that dropped the pass, right? His kids are hearing it in school. But Tom Landry writes him a beautiful letter saying, you know, your contributions to this team were massive. I don't care what anybody says. Don't let anybody make you think different. You're a Cowboy for life. It's incredible to see Tom Landry honoring him in this way when you juxtapose it with the way his relationship with the Cardinals franchise was and still is. He is, I'll spoil a little bit that he was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. He is the only Cardinal who is in the Pro Football Hall of Fame who is not in the Cardinals Ring of Honor. And there is no explanation for this. He was loved in the locker room. He wanted to come back, and the owner didn't give him a contract, so then he went to the Cowboys. Perhaps there's a sense of betrayal there. There are actually, I should say, he made some comments that were taken perhaps in an incendiary way. He did not mean them in that way, but basically saying, well, the Cardinals didn't want me, but the Cowboys did, so I'm happy to be a Cowboy now. It's impossible to think that grudge has lasted now 45 years, and still today, Jackie Smith is not recognized in the Cardinals Ring of Honor. He's not so concerned with things like that. His outlook on life is he doesn't really think his football career meant much of anything. He has a daughter who's a principal of a high school. He has another daughter who does work with drug rehab facilities. He has a son who runs a local business, and he says, like, my kids are making actual impacts. My football career, that was a nice little fun thing that I had. But for him to say that is honestly to undersell it. When he retired, he had the most receptions for any tight end in NFL history. He had the most receiving yards for any tight end in NFL history. And he retired in 78, and it wasn't until Ozzie Newsome broke his records in 1991 that somebody surpassed those. So Jackie Smith is only remembered for that moment where he drops the pass in the back of the end zone, the sickest man in all of America. And my impression of that moment is he's a lifelong Cowboy. Fuck this guy. I hate the Dallas Cowboys. I'm so glad that Jackie Smith dropped that pass. But then when you peel back the layers, you actually see somebody who was loved by every teammate that he ever had, predominantly a St. Louis Cardinal, a man very well respected in his community, in his locker room. I think it's insane that he is not in the Cardinals' Ring of Honor. And I don't think it would be as crazy to put our other two candidates this week ahead of him, but I do think he is very worthy of a spot in our Hall of Guy.
I mean, certainly if we can't get him in the Hall of Guy, like, we do need to get him in that Ring of Honor. It seems very doable for us.
All of Arizona sports are irrelevant, and we can just ignore that they exist. And he still has his Pro Football Hall of Fame, which is much better than anything that Arizona could ever recognize. We could get rid of the state of Arizona, and nothing bad would ever happen.
Society would improve.
I don't know. The Mercury looked pretty good last night.
They just become part of New Mexico. It's New Mexico, too.
Newest Mexico. Or does that be... I can't be old Mexico. I don't know. We don't need
Newer Mexico.
New Mexico. It's like in Futurama, New York, New Mexico.
Okay, yeah. So it's New Mexico and New Mexico coexisting next to one another. I'm down with it. The question, though, is which of these guys are we down with? I want to say to start, I really like that I think all three of their careers like have kind of a different relationship to the mistake. You've got, just going backwards, like Jackie Smith's comes at the end of this record-breaking, pioneering career at his position. And then, like, you know, does a lot to be the lasting image of it, but it's at the tail end of already having accomplished so much. Lindsey Jacobellis, you've got, sure, the, like, mistake coloring things early, and then the periodic mistake, but you do also ultimately have the redemption at the end. You have that moment of kind of cleansing it away. And then going to Merkle, you've got this mistake, like, pretty much as early as it can be in the career, that then casts that shadow over the remainder of it as the question of, like, well, how much does that influence their career coming in so early versus later on? I just think it's interesting that all three have those kind of distinctions.
Definitely. And there was one thing I forgot to bring up earlier that I do want to say real quick, because it relates to things we've talked about in the past. Lindsey Jacobellis did compete in the challenge on the Champs versus Pros in the same season as
okay.
CT.
Okay. So we've got some degrees of guy separation there.
She actually helped eliminate CT in the final. And then for the final challenge was paired with Cameron Wembley, the ex-NFL linebacker / defensive end. This ended up actually being a problem for her because a lot of final challenges are like long distance things. And they said beforehand, no one Cameron Wembley's size has ever competed in a final challenge because of that. And they also had to wear weighted vests. So Cameron Wembley was struggling real bad. And Lindsey Jacobellis almost carried the entire team to the finish. As the only pros to make the final, she finished second. And apparently they wanted her to just compete in more challenges because she was pretty much as good as the actual like veteran challengers.
Well, in every 4 years she will, and she'll fail for a number of them after the second place finish, and then in like 16 she'll finally break through.
I mean,
and
honestly,
she'll
that would
break
be
through
really
the
cool.
same year as a mixed gender competition as well.
It would be really cool if that's what she just decided to do after this. She's like, actually, I'm going to go back to the challenge now that I'm done doing snowboarding. That would be very funny. But I had to bring that up because I have watched that season and I realized that, like, doing the research, like, oh, I've watched this with Caitlin.
Now, on the topic of Lindsey Jacobellis, as we start to try and like winnow this down, I do feel like we need to bring up the fact that she does ultimately get redemption. Like Jackie Smith and Fred Merkle, these are the defining moments of their careers, and there is nothing that really like comes close to that later on. Is her story still defined by the losses up to that point? Sure, I think that's an argument that you made very well. But the story does ultimately end with success. And so I think in this context, if we want to start winnowing it down, I think that's kind of the first cut.
I mean, it depends because Jackie Smith is in the Hall of Fame. And I've never heard of Fred Merkle before, so I'd never heard of his...
You'd never heard Merkle's boner?
No, I'd never heard of him before. He was a complete... I'd never heard of Jackie Smith either, to be honest. The only one of these three I'd ever heard of was Lindsey Jacobellis. And... like, if that's how you want to winnow things, fine, that's fine by me. But again, one of these guys is also in the Hall of Fame for his chosen sport. And yet, I have never heard of him or his error. So I don't think it's that big of a deal.
And yet, he is still known for being the guy that dropped that pass.
I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like, I've never heard of it. I've never heard of that or Fred Merkle. So it's like, you could say he's known for this. This Hall of Fame football player is known for this. Xavier, you've never heard of this guy who's known for this thing that happened? No, I've never heard of him.
I mean, I think you're telling on yourself right now. Like, Bonehead Merkle and Jackie Smith.
I think Lindsey Jacobellis' fall... I think Lindsey Jacobellis' fall was known by many more people than either of the two that you brought up, and that is the only thing I will say.
I'm willing to bet a large amount of money against that.
People outside our country don't give a shit about baseball from the early 1900s or the NFL from the 1970s. I will say the Winter Olympics have a much bigger reach, especially this century Winter Olympics, compared to those two things.
So the Olympics are definitely more known around the world. That's totally fine. I'll tell on myself a little bit. I had never heard of Lindsey Jacobellis. In fact, I thought that it was like Lindsey Ellis was her name and Jacob was her middle name when you first said it. Like, when I Googled her, I was like, oh, that's one word. Crazy. So
at this point, we're at 2 people have known of Lindsey Jacobellis, because I know James did.
Yeah.
2 people have known about Fred Merkle. James, did you know about Jackie Smith? Because I had not. Okay, so 2 people have known about each of the people, so we can't eliminate based off of that.
Well, it's not eliminating based off of that. I think it's the fact that there's a catharsis. Like, in the words of Patrick Bateman,
this I agree with.
There can be no catharsis.
Like, notoriety off the table. Like, we don't need to worry about that. Again, I'm the only person that knew about all 3 of these people, which I don't think has happened before. Good for me. But Merkle and Smith do not have a moment that comes after this that absolves them. Smith, because it is the end. It is his last thing.
He was inducted into the Hall of Fame after that.
Yes, he was. Absolutely, he was. But I'm like, he hadn't won a championship previously. This was his chance to win a championship. And while he is not responsible for them losing single-handedly, as we've said a couple times now, PR matters. And he is remembered as the reason for losing that championship. And at the same time,
first
Merkle,
Super Bowl in his last season. You have no sympathy for Jackie Smith, Xavier.
Not really. I'll be honest. He retired as the greatest tight end in history at the time and made the Hall of Fame.
And you don't even know who he is.
Yeah, and I'm looking at his Hall of Fame plaque right now that doesn't mention that Super Bowl at all. So
why would his Hall of Fame plaque be like, oh yeah, and here's that moment he sucked shit, by the way. Like,
no, the only mention of the Cowboys is he finished his career with the Dallas Cowboys in 1978.
Yeah, that's like what you can say about his time with the Dallas Cowboys, other than he also dropped a potential Super Bowl winning pass.
That sentence is his for sale baby shoes never worn.
It was the third quarter of a game where 4 more touchdowns were scored.
Sure. PR matters.
I'm sorry, that a third quarter drop in a game where 4 more touchdowns were scored does nothing to me. That's like
it was when they did a top 100 of like the biggest moments in NFL history. It was number 28. I'm just saying, if you're saying it's not a thing that people know about, like, it is a thing that people know about. That's all I'm saying.
When did they do that top 100? It
was like 2017, I think.
All right.
There's been some good moments then, but it's still definitely like top 50 at the very worst. And like, look, if late in the third quarter doesn't do it for you, bottom of the ninth, 2 outs, rung up by a rat-fink Johnny Evers so bad that like years later, he's blamed for his pitcher calling him off of a foul that he could have caught that the catcher then drops after a different guy named Fred on the team made an error that allowed the eventual game-winning run on base in the first place. And he still takes the blame.
PR versus actual errors doesn't do it for me. James, I need you to know that if it's not Lindsey Jacobellis, it's Jackie Smith, because you're not getting a third in a row on a guy I've never heard about and who I don't think is that
interesting. Criteria is high, but I am like incandescent with rage that with, I think, a genuinely good shot at three-peat, Xavier just hasn't heard of fucking Fred Merkle. You have not heard of Fred Merkle's boner.
I'm incandescent with rage that you decided to start by attacking Lindsey Jacobellis before anything else. Oh, you immediately thought about, that's right, we haven't talked about Lindsey Jacobellis, and yet your first thing was, let's get rid of Lindsey Jacobellis, because after multiple failures, including the biggest blunder in winter sports Olympics history, which is many sports over a very long time, you're like, actually, she did get the gold at the end, so we can ignore all of the 16 years of her being made fun of for that.
Hey man, if Fred Merkle had won one of his 6 World Series appearances, maybe I'd feel differently.
I don't know. Maybe it's just the fact that I had never heard of him, and I have never heard of Jackie Smith, but the fact that that was the first person you want to get rid of. We're all incandescent with rage. We're defending our people. That's how it goes. But the only way this is going to be solved is by me saying, I'm going to take myself down and take James out with me, and Jackie Smith is going to win this by default, because I am not going to let James win a third because I'm mad about attacking Lindsey Jacobellis, and 3 in a row is a very high bar.
Attacking! Slander! Is it libel if it's in a podcast? Like, if we make a transcript, does it count as libel then, Mr. Lawyer Man?
I didn't write it down.
The biggest blunder in Winter Olympics history. By an individual, yes, but I think if you take the cumulative of all the people that wiped out so that Stephen Bradbury could win, you aggregate those, I think that is a bigger...
Stephen Bradbury winning is, yeah.
I think it's a
just
bigger
that
collective
general
blunder.
scrum.
Poor Apollo Anton Ono.
Diaz, no love for your childhood library companion, Fred Merkle.
I mean, this isn't, like, I'm legitimately not even trolling you, Xavier. I am kind of, like, on the fence about Bonehead Merkle. Because, like, I honestly, full again, telling on myself. I asked in our chat earlier today, like, or I went back and I looked. I was like, oh, like, if James didn't take baseball, I'm going to take baseball, and I'm going to do Bonehead Merkle. Like, that's a thought that went through my head 6 hours ago. So it's still, like, lingering in there a little bit. You know what I mean? Like, it's there, like, hey, it's kind of agreeing with James. This is a tough one. I really don't want to vote for a Dallas Cowboy. But he's not a Dallas Cowboy. He's a St. Louis Cardinal. But they don't love him. It's so heartbreaking.
Genuinely, here's a question. This doesn't, I think, like, necessarily need to influence it. I just don't know if I got, like, what is his feeling about the Cardinals afterwards?
It's kind of, like, vaguely betrayed, I guess. Okay. You know, I played for this franchise for 15, 16 years. You don't give me a call back after you have me in for a physical, and now I'm the asshole. Is kind of where he's at on it.
He did say in his enshrinement speech that my time spent in Dallas was the most enjoyable single year I ever spent in football. And he thanked Dallas before he thanked St. Louis.
Kind of surprised he didn't go in as a Cowboy. Like, the way he's talking. It feels like that's something he might have asked to do.
Yeah, he spoke so highly of playing with Staubach and playing for Landry.
And is his contentment and his peace with that maybe a contrast to Fred Merkle, who, first off, like, is telling John McGraw the next year, dude, get me the fuck out of here. These fans hate me. They do not want me here. And then later on is leaving the sport entirely because a minor league player of his is calling him bonehead. Who's more defined by the mistake? That's not necessarily the category, but that is a question that I pose to you. Who's more defined by the mistake? In that case, I do think it's Fred Merkle.
Here's where I settle, and I think this is fair. When I think of this category, I think of biggest blunders, people who are known for their blunders. And I think the best way to quantify that is how large is the shadow cast over a career. And as you said, Fred Merkle had a very nice career. He's a solid ball player. But it's not necessarily a complete disgrace to his legacy that he is remembered for that moment. He is a guy that went on to lose a lot. Whereas we look at Jackie Smith, and this is this incredible player in the history of the NFL that, honestly, when I started looking him up today, I didn't know if he was going to be like, oh, this was like a 3-year guy and he got out of the league after that, or if this was his rookie season. I knew nothing about the long winding path and the incredible career that he had.
And you fell in love with this Dallas Cowboy.
And all I knew about him was that he fucked up in that moment.
He hurt the Cowboys, Diaz. He caused the Cowboys pain.
Sleeper agent.
He really did. It was the long con
Well, then it
the
wouldn't
whole
be a
way.
mistake. Actually, we need to clarify very specifically it was not, because then it wouldn't be a mistake and it wouldn't be
No, that's fair. That's fair.
eligible.
Before Xavier, we already won. It's like, isn't that what they say in court? Like, if you've won the case, shut up.
Stop talking.
The defense rests.
I'm ready to concede. I'm ready to concede because I know the criteria is going to be high on 3. And besides, I've never been more stabbed in the back by Xavier, who has never heard of Bonehead Merkle or watched an episode of ABC's Wild World of Sports in his life. Again,
Says the
just
person
like,
who stabbed me in the back first before anything else.
I'm just trying to adhere to the category and just look. All I want to say, I'm ready to concede. The last point I want to make about Merkle: what kind of a career could he have had? That's the thing that I would put forward. Like, yeah, he didn't necessarily have something that stepped out of that shadow. What could have bloomed if the sunlight had reached it? But I think I agree that Jackie Smith is a very deserving one, and I'm ready to lay down my sword.
I mean, for Jackie Smith, it was an incredible career, a legend of the NFL game. If you love Mark Andrews, if you love Dallas Goedert, if you loved Zach Ertz, you have to tip your cap to the man that was the first to get down in that 3-point stance and say, fuck it, I'm going long. He has the highest yards per reception of any tight end in the NFL Hall of Fame. He was the long-time holder of the most receiving yards and most receptions for a tight end. There's only the one reception that he wished he could have had. But if he had caught it, we wouldn't be doing this right now. We wouldn't be inducting him into our Hall of Guy for his famous blunder. But more importantly, we want to recognize the incredible career and the incredible guy that he is. He, in fact, called himself in an interview with Sports Illustrated the luckiest guy on earth. And he is now the most recent guy into our hall. Welcome, Jackie Smith, to the Hall of Guy.
If you'd said that, this could have gone so much smoother. Much like Mike McGee, if someone owns the guy title, I'm so much more ready to go with it. But nonetheless, Jackie Smith has wormed his way in. And I do think it's a very deserving victory for him and a victory for you, Diaz. Folks, it's been a win for all of us because you got to listen to this, and we hope you've enjoyed it. The people that helped make that possible are, of course, producer Craig, the coders behind him, and our musical director, Don Ham, who we thank for that lovely theme music. We thank all of them very much, but most of all, we thank you for joining us once again. You can always continue to keep up with us with all of the information found at bit.ly/rememberthatguy, all one word, all lowercase. Anything else for you guys here on the way out?
A judge in Indiana just ruled that tacos and burritos are Mexican-style sandwiches.
Oh, dude, we've been talking about this in the baseball chat for hours. Like, I'm all about, we need to embrace, if it is meat, veggies, cheese, any combination thereof between carbs, it's a sandwich. Embrace the universal sandwich.
So that's good, because the ruling part that everyone was talking about was the tacos and burritos, but the judge also said
Heroes, banh mi,
non-wraps, banh mi, like you said, heroes, all count as sandwiches for the purpose of opening a sandwich shop.
Oh,
Diaz, what do you think about sandwiches?
You don't have to have a thought on sandwiches.
Well, no, I just think it would be hilarious if that ended up getting to the Supreme Court and we had, like, as the official law of the land, a hot dog is a sandwich.
The internet rejoices. Our long national nightmare is over. What is also over is this episode. It has been delightful to have been one of your hosts, James.
I've been the very special guest, Xavier.
And I'm Diaz, and as Doc Rivers once said to the Sixers huddle, "Come on, guys! Come on!"
Why does he always sound like he's dying?
Diaz, I have good news for you. Galley just texted me asking what I want for 1-6. So as my designated trade guy, I'm going to get you set up with Galley, see what he's offering.
That would be fucking hilarious. Oh my God. Yeah, so Xavier's not going to be at our draft Saturday, so
Sure.
I have full autonomy over his entire picks, and I can do with them whatever I want.
I feel like when you're granted that power, you can be trusted with it.
Right.
It took 2 minutes for him to post in our group chat that I've traded 1-6 for Dorian Thompson-Robinson.
Listen, the market on DTR is up now. I'm getting texts from everybody.